Welcome to the Picky Girl Travels podcast, the show for Black women who want more out of life and to live it as they see fit. The message here is all about defying convention, embracing adventure, and regretting absolutely nothing. I'm your host, Adria of the blog pickygirltravelstheworld.com. I'm excited for y'all to hear my conversation with this week's guest. Her story, it's inspiring and it's so real. That seems like a weird way to describe it, but I think after you listen to the episode, you'll understand what I mean. And I don't think that you'll make it through this episode without finding yourself at some point nodding your head like, yup, that's me, or I've been there, or absolutely laughing out loud. We laughed, we giggled throughout this entire interview. It was so fun. My guest today is Adria Tolliver, PhD, who the internet tells me is an expert in experimental psychology and a HR bigwig for a major world brand that I don't know if we're allowed to mention it, but it's a big company. And also, according to
we can mention it.
Okay, so you work for PepsiCo, right?
Yes. So I work for PepsiCo is our parent company, and I actually work for the Frito-Lay division of PepsiCo. A lot of folks don't know that we are the same company.
Okay. And also, according to the internet, you're also an adjunct professor at 2 different institutions?
Ooh, that's that part is a little outdated. That part was like pre our Dubai experiences. But I have done some adjunct professoring at UTA where I got my PhD, and then also at the Art Institute of Dallas for a little bit. Yeah.
But however you look at it, you're kind of a big deal. Okay. Well, you are. And I will be the first one to admit that I really have no idea what experimental psychology is or how that fits with working in HR. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yes, so we're going to go in a little bit of a tangent story here, but I'll try to keep it brief. So my degree, my master's degree is in IO psychology, which is really kind of business psychology or workplace psychology. And then the UTA, which is UT Arlington, actually doesn't have an IO psychology PhD program. So my only option for staying at the school and getting a PhD, well, I don't want to say my only option, but the option for me to kind of stay on the same track was they did have a program in an experimental psychology. So what I did is so my PhD is technically in experimental psychology with an emphasis in IO psychology. So really, it's workplace psychology. I apply psychological principles to the world of work. So for the first 10 years of my career, I actually specialized in like pre-hire assessment. So in everything related to selection. So when you think about if anyone has ever had to go online and apply for a job and, you go through the application process, right? There are times where I've been part of the team that has designed, well, what questions do we ask as part of the interview and the application process? We build competency models, we do job analysis, and all of that kind of feeds into the data that we use to say, hey, this person is likely to be a good fit for this job or not, right? So I did that for about 10 years across 4 different companies, joined Frito-Lay in December of 2016, and revamped, actually the role that I was hired into was to centralize Frito-Lay's frontline staffing process. Did that for about 18 months. And then I jumped over to the world of being an HR business partner or an HR generalist. And that is when you typically think of what an HR person is, that got us very much closer to that. What I would say is that in that role, when I was still headquartered in Dallas, is that my role was more like strategic and projects like recruiting. How do we get more, diversity, like female diversity in finance? That was one of the groups that I supported. How do we get more, racial and ethnic diversity in HR, right? That was my other client group that I supported, right? So, and then kind of executing other big HR, more strategic long-term projects. Then I went to Dubai for 5 months to do a short-term learning and development assignment. Came back, and then now I'm in Denver at one of our supply chain plants. And that is like really, truly what we think of as like, most people think of as like day-to-day HR, right? And kind of dealing with more day-to-day employee-facing issues and problems.
I can definitely see how psychology would fit into that.
in a lot of ways. I mean, things like conflict resolution, right? Things like I think one of the biggest things right now that I want to build the capability in my managers is, how do you lead without authority, right? How do you people talk about servant leadership all the time, and, that's a useful model, but how also do you how can you be an empathetic leader as well, right? So lots of psychological principles to apply to work. The biggest thing is that people think I go around kind of psychoanalyzing folks, because I actually am a licensed psychologist. And it's like, no, I don't. I notice patterns of behavior, right? Just because naturally I'm just a curious person, right? Like, people watching is my favorite like pastime of all time. So naturally I just observe people's behavior, but I'm not like, I don't have some like running, people think I have like a running file of, they said this and they did this and they walked that way and they held their hands that way. What does that mean? Like, I do not have the mental capacity, nor do I have the desire to do that, right? Not in the way that people think that I do.
Now, you are originally from Dallas, specifically
Yes.
Oak Cliff. I am
very
from,
important.
yes, because I'm from Houston and I grew up in South Park, which I think is kind of a similar sort of background and area. So I understand the importance of specifying. Back then, when you were growing up in Oak Cliff, is this where you imagined yourself?
That's a reflection question. In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no, right? Did I know that I was going to make it out the hood? Yes, right? Like, I knew that I was going to do everything in my power to not be the statistic that my zip code had predestined me to be, right? Did I know that I would be standing here in my apartment, that when I walk in every day, the first thing that I see is a view of the mountains here in Denver? Absolutely not. Did I know that I'd be like the HR lead for, Frito-Lay in our supply chain plant? No, I didn't know that, because I actually thought I was going to be a criminal defense attorney, right? From the time I was like 6, I was going to be Matlock Perry Mason. Okay. But so things turned out a little bit differently, right? Than my initial childhood dreams. So yeah, I'd say in some ways, did I know that this is the type of life that I would be living? Yes. Did I know it would look exactly this way? No.
Now, you got your bachelor's degree at Agnes Scott.
I did.
How did you go from Oak Cliff to Agnes Scott?
My friend Angela. So, I am the first, was like the first person in kind of my immediate family to go to college, right? Kind of extended family, there were folks, but in my immediate family, first person to go to college. And I said, so listen, there aren't, many people around me, right, they're not going to be able to answer my questions, right, because they haven't had that experience. So I said to myself, well, let let me shadow someone who is going through this process so that I can be prepared when it's my turn. So Angela's my friend from high school. She's 2 years ahead of me. So when she was going through her college process and I was learning about it and talking to her about it, she mentioned this college, Agnes Scott College. Now she ended up, I'm not going to tell too much of her business because she's not here to do this podcast, but she ended up not going to Agnes Scott. But it always stuck with me that like she's when she was doing her research, she spoke highly of it and, you know, just had good things to say about it. And so I said, well, I'll check it out, right? When it was my turn, you know, junior year, senior year in college, and I was kind of narrowing down my list of places to go, Agnes Scott came top of the list. I got to a point where I knew that I needed a smaller school. So population less than 1,000, right, when I entered. I knew that I needed a smaller, tiny. I'll tell you, I walked into a history class one day and there were 32 people in there. And I said, oh no, like 4 of y'all need to leave. Like at least 4 of y'all need to leave because I cannot learn with 31 other people in here, right? So I knew that I needed a very small learning environment. So that's my journey, you know, some part of my journey to Agnes Scott.
That's wild because I went to a very small high school. I graduated in a class of 42, 43. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. I was bound and determined to go to college someplace where I would be nothing but a number. I didn't want any, because this school was so small. Like if somebody was skipping class, they would page you over the PA and be like, why aren't you in class? So I was like, I'm done with this. And when I walked into like freshman history, there had to be 200, 300 people in there. Easy. Now, what was it like? Because Agnes Scott is all women. What was it like attending school?
Yes. I would sit in class with, I sat in class with some of the most brilliant minds in America. I sat in class with Sidney Rucker, who is a Gates Millennium Scholar, right? And it was a very powerful experience to me to sit in class, have these really great conversations, even just on the hall. We'd be sitting on the floor in the hall, right? Supposed to be studying, but we not. Or we taking a, you know, quote unquote study break that was supposed to be 30 minutes that turned into 3 hours. But to have these really just awesome conversations and this dialogue and discourse, and to know that all of these thoughts and all of these ideas and points of view and perspectives are coming from women. It was such an empowering experience. It was such a motivating experience that it's like, we really do, like, we are awesome. We are smart. We are intelligent. We are, you know, I don't know. It was just, I think the basic way to describe it is that it was a very empowering experience for me.
Well, that's what I would imagine it to be like. I went to an all-girls high school, and I can tell you that when that decision was made for me, I was not enthusiastic about it at all. Not at all. But, you know, it's a lot of what you said. Like when I had distance, like I couldn't see it when I was there. But once I had distance from it, being in an environment where the decision makers, the student leaders, all of that, it's women, boys are taken out of the equation. That's a good experience to have.
Yeah. And my when 14-year-old me, who was a freshman in high school, and and Anastasia Cunningham, I think she's married at this point, so I don't know her last name now, but she told me that she was going to Wellesley, right? Another all women's college. And my 14-year-old self literally asked her, but what are you going to do about boys? And I feel like I can still see the look on her face, like, oh girl, you'll learn. It'll
The
be
boys
fine.
will be there.
The boys, and right, I went to college, Agnes Scott is in Decatur. It's 15 minutes outside of Atlanta. So it was great that like during the week I could focus, I could, do what I needed to do. And then Morehouse and Clark were like a train ride away, right? Or like, somebody had a car. So they were like a hop, skip, and a jump away, right? So I was not missing anything in that front, in that regard.
So was the goal always a PhD?
No, I was, so I graduated college in 2008 and the world was in a financial crisis, or at least the US was. And I was like, so
Oh.
listen, I don't think that there's going to be a job or a job that I want to do. So let me just stay in school, right? Let me kind of avoid adulting and paying bills and like all that kind of stuff. I'm gonna just stay in school. So at the time I was going to get a master's degree. The guy that I was dating still lived in Atlanta. I was going to go grab my master's degree and come back and like, be with him and all that. Right. And so then I started to do a little bit of the math on it. Right. So I applied for the master's program, got in, right, kind of was maybe a year and a half into it. And I realized, so wait a minute, if I just invest another 2.5 years, I can get a PhD and like significantly increase my earning potential. So it was that was honestly, that's how it happened. That's how it happened. I just did a little bit of the math, decided to take a gamble on myself and say, hey, if I just invest a little bit more time, I can get this PhD. And the thing about it is there are certain jobs, especially when I was going to stay kind of as a traditional IO psychologist, right? There are certain jobs that are PhD only jobs. And I never wanted to be at a point where someone could say to me, well, you can't apply for this job, or we're not going to interview you because you don't have a PhD. So for me, it was kind of a simple decision to make that, hey, I'm just going to give this education thing another 2.5 years. And then there will never be a job that I'm not, at least from an education credential perspective, that I'm not qualified for.
That's pretty smart.
So it paid off. It paid off.
I just think about like where my mind was when I graduated college. Well, that's a story for another time. Now, I follow you on IG because both you and I share a love of sewing. But
yes.
The main reason why I wanted you to be a guest on the podcast was because I read a post of yours where you said something like, you were reflecting on something and you said you wanted to be truly and fully happy and not just social media happy. And in order for that to happen, you were going to have to be intentional about your happiness.
Yep.
I'm like all about that, because you put your happiness in the hands of other people and they will drop it every time.
Right.
And then when I read this last part, I was like, I need to talk to her. You said I was going to be intentional about living my life exactly the way I wanted to live it. So talk to me about how you got to this place.
It was it was a decision to get there, right? So I was married and was not happy in my marriage. I knew that like, hey, I know that like if I leave my marriage, happiness is over there on the other side, right? I just have to make the decision to leave my marriage. I also like, there were times where I would, and I don't know if it was a cycle and kind of all tangled up together, is that for several years I battled seasonal, specifically it started out I think as like seasonal depression that just kind of kept carrying over. And I realized that kind of me saying this as, you know, again, a licensed psychologist this might ruffle a little feathers later. But this is my story. This is my truth. I decided one day that I am just not going to live this way anymore. I am not going to be depressed anymore. I am not going to, you know, there were times where I would come home and spend hours just crying, right? There were times where I would come home and I would, you know, just lay in the bed, right? Like I wasn't getting anything out of life. And I just decided, hey, I'm wasting away my life. Like I am wasting away my life and hours upon hours that I could be being productive or at least doing the things that I enjoy, doing the things that I love. I'm not doing those things. So I'm going to make a decision to not live that way anymore. I dived into my sewing room. I diffused bergamot. I was diffusing all the essential oils to like give me energy and kind of help me, right? Like I needed some help because it had been a cycle, like this cycle and pattern of depression. And so I needed to, and I just focused my effort and energy on happiness. Like happiness is what's important to me. Living a fulfilling life is what's important to me. And then and then there were like some other things along the way, kind of some pivotal moments, right? Like Brene Brown's Netflix special where she talked about vulnerability. That was a big, major unlock for me. And then, I mean, I really truly focused on, I know that I can live what I refer to as a happy, healthy, and a whole life. And so I am going to make decisions that are going to be aligned and that get me closer to the happy, healthy, and whole life that I want to live and that I know that I can live. And a major part of that was making the decision to leave my marriage.
Now, all of this resonated with me because I had a very similar, I didn't have the depression, but I had a situation where I looked at my life and I was profoundly unhappy. And I was like, this can't be all that I get. And that, of course, led sort of indirectly to the creation of this podcast. Now, I think it was there's something else I read that you wrote where you said you came to the realization that in order to live a happy and full life that you wanted to live, you needed to leave your marriage. Now, I'm curious about how you arrived there, because my own story, I was married for a really long time, like 20 years. And I once Googled, how do you know when it's time to get a divorce? And the first article I read was like, if you're on the internet Googling,
listen, girl, okay.
It's probably time for you to leave. But I still couldn't do it then.
Okay.
I still couldn't do it.
No,
I knew that's what I needed to do,
yep.
but I could not do it. So I'm really curious at how you got to that place from knowing that's what you needed to do to actually being able to move on it.
Yeah. So I go back to that Brene Brown Netflix, I guess, TED Talk, right? It's the filming of her TED Talk. She talked about vulnerability. And that was an unlock for me to realize that, hey, I did not feel comfortable being vulnerable in my marriage, right? Because of things that happened. You know, I was no longer at a place where I felt like I could be vulnerable, you know, and trust my partner with like my feelings and with my emotions, right? And with my true self, right?
You can't see me, but I'm over here nodding my head. But go ahead. Go ahead.
I said, but I'm gonna try, right? Like I feel like I really feel like I should just leave this marriage. But in order for me to leave the marriage and be happy, healthy, and whole, I have to give this one last shot. And I've truly got to give it, I've got to give it my all, right? Like I've really got to try, right? Because I got faults, you know. I have faults. There are things that like I could do better, right. So it kind of centered around this vulnerability piece. So I asked my husband, like, hey, I watched this. It was really impactful for me. Will you watch it? Right. So we sat down, we watched it together, and I shared, like, hey, this is a thing that I want to practice. Right. I feel like this is, kind of a major void. And I want to practice this kind of vulnerability thing. Right. We were also in marriage counseling, and that, it was just kind of a combination of things that that really solidified it for me. So one session, there was a specific task that the therapist asked my husband to do, and he spent more time complaining about the task and why he didn't think the homework assignment basically was a good idea. It was never going to work, and it just doesn't make sense to me. And that hurt. It hurt a lot, because the way that I viewed that was, I'm trying. The therapist that mind you, that you selected, that you wanted us to go to. So you've done your research. This is the person that you've decided, right, that you kind of want us to go to for this round of therapy. You can't even try. Like, you're not even willing to try the thing that he asked you to do. And that hurt so much that I was like, you're not even willing to try. If you'd spend the amount of energy at least trying the thing, and then you can come back and say, it's stupid, I don't believe in it, it doesn't work, see, nothing happened, nothing was different. But you're not even willing to try this thing. So yeah, you've let me know, right? That just, it really made me feel very terrible. And then we went on a cruise, and I love vacations, right? Traveling. I was, again, excited about this podcast, traveling, seeing all of your adventures, right? We went on a cruise and got into 3 separate arguments. And by the end of that week, I stopped speaking to my husband. And for me, it was like, okay, this ain't it. Like, this ain't it. And you know what? I cannot spend effort, and I am no longer willing, because I can, but I am no longer willing to put my effort and energy into this relationship where I am not happy, and I can't change the other person. One of the biggest things for me is that I used to always say the problems that we had in our marriage were not unsolvable, right? And I do still believe that to be true. But where I got at the end of that cruise was, it may very well be true that our problems are not unsolvable, but until my partner, wants to take some responsibility and some accountability for his part, I can't make him do that, right? I can't make him do that. I can't force him to do that. And so this relationship is not healthy for me. My home is not, a place of peace for me. And I really need, when the world beats me up, when work is tough, when, other relationships are challenging, I at least need to come home and have this be my place of peace and refuge. And it absolutely was not that for me. So very long answer, but
No,
that's how I
your
got there.
answer was fabulous. And I'm sitting over here nodding my head, because there comes a moment where you can't deny it anymore. Like when he
Right.
did
Yeah.
not even want to give that exercise and effort, you can't deny anymore that this is the amount of work he's willing to do, and that's not enough. Like, I had a
Right.
similar moment where I was like, I'm not going to say I'm ashamed, but it took me a long time to really see who he was.
Yeah.
And when I did, I was like, damn, this is who you are, and this is who you think I am. Like, if this is who you think I am, we can't be together.
Oh yeah. There's a whole piece of that. There's a whole piece of that.
Yeah.
There's a whole piece of that.
And when it
that's
hits you, there's just this, you can no longer, I don't want to say you lied to yourself, but you can no longer talk yourself out of what is reality.
Yeah, you can't rationalize it anymore. You can't rationalize it anymore. You can't, you just get tired.
Yeah.
I got tired.
And you choose yourself. And there is nothing wrong with that.
Yep. One of the, I'm not sure if you have read, and I know I was talking about these books so much, but Glennon Doyle's books, everyone is reading Untamed. And so it was recommended to me, and I saw, like there's all this like critical acclaim for Untamed, and realized that she has 2 other books. And I read all 3 of them in sequence. And so at this point I read them like back to back to back. And I don't know which book it was in, but she was talking to her daughter about something that her daughter didn't want to do. And so she said, well, don't do it. And so her daughter says, well, but I'm going to disappoint, this other person. And what she says to herself is that you will always disappoint someone. Make sure that the person that you're not disappointing is you. You have to always choose yourself. Choose to disappoint the other person every time. Do not choose to disappoint yourself.
That's a word right there.
It's so many gems. Listen, if you ain't read it, there's so many gems in those books. But that is one of my main takeaways from that series of books.
After you got divorced, you took a solo trip to Mexico. Was that your first solo trip?
No, no, it was not. I believe in vacations. I believe in solo vacationing. There are, unpopular opinion over here, but married people need to take solo vacations too, right? If that's something that you want to do. I got a lot of side eyes and a lot of, commentary, because even when I was married, right, I'd take solo vacation. Well, I've been taking solo vacation since I could vacation. Right. So my first kind of major solo vacation, I went to South Africa. So I spent a week on safari in South Africa, and then went kind of the actual purpose of my trip was I have a mentee, Brittany Williams, who she went to high school. So this is actually a beautiful story. So you remember my friend Angela, right? She is who introduced me to Agnes Scott. Angela taught high school where she and I met, where we went to high school. One of her students was Brittany. Angela and I convinced Brittany's parents. Brittany wanted to go to Agnes Scott. We convinced Brittany's parents to let her go to Agnes Scott. And I made Brittany promise me one thing, and I promised her 2 things. I made her promise me that she would study abroad, because I think that's very important. Every person should do it. And right, understanding that, like, if you have the financial means to, right, I realize that that's a statement of privilege, right? But if you can find a way to do so, that you should study abroad. And I promised her that anywhere in the world she went to study abroad, that I would come visit her, because I studied abroad in Australia, and other people had their parents and, people coming to visit them. My mom and them they didn't have them resources, right?
Okay, and Australia is on the other side of the world.
And it is on the whole entire other side of the world, right? Nobody was coming to visit me. So I know, like, what that experience can be like. So I promised her, hey, you have to study abroad, and I will come anywhere in the world. I don't care where you are, I'll come visit you. So circling back to, I then, I spent a week on safari by myself, and then I spent the next week visiting her. So I have traveled as far by myself from the U.S. to South Africa. Okay. So I am familiar with the solo travel, and that trip to me was very important. And the reason why I spaced it out, because I moved out of my house in August, and so I spaced it out.
How long was this after the cruise?
This was So let's see, we got back from the cruise on maybe like July, somewhere between July 10th or 13th. I moved out of my house on like the 24th of August. So I spaced it out so far to give enough time to make sure that the divorce was finalized. And that was kind of like my post-divorce solo trip to myself. Whereas the first weekend in December, I had already been like saying was my wellness weekend, because there were a couple years prior to that. The first weekend in December, I went to a wellness retreat, again, solo by myself. And so I had started designating the first weekend in December as kind of like my wellness weekend. So it just kind of made perfect sense for me to do that post-divorce solo trip that first weekend in December as a wellness vacation.
Now, you said of this trip that you wanted to take time away to reflect and appreciate yourself for making an important decision in your happiness plan.
Yes.
Were you able to do that? Did that work out that way for you?
It did. It worked out that way, in that like I did what I wanted to do. Like the first night I was tired. I ordered room service and I went to bed. And that's okay, because it was my vacation. Every morning I would get up and journal, right? I would get up and kind of journal, what I did the previous day, but then also just kind of whatever thoughts and feelings were floating through my head. And then I designated kind of a different activity for each day. So there was one day that was a spa day, and I let myself buy all the spa treatments, right? Like everyone that I wanted, I let myself buy it, which there's a whole nother lesson and sermon there in like finances and financial trauma, right? The financial trauma associated with growing up poor, right? But we can do that in a different podcast. I did one day that was just kind of like a beach day. I did another day that was an adventure day. So that was my zip lining day. It was a lot of doing what I wanted to do and kind of taking time to be still. I didn't answer no work emails. I went off the grid. I was, off social media, right? I turned on my GPS locator so that my friend Kristen, safety first, right? Like I'm all about solo travel, but also smart solo travel. So I turned on my GPS locator. My friend Kristen knew where I was at all times, right? It was a great trip for, exactly the purpose that I intended it to be.
Now, you did therapy after you got divorced. You joined a divorce recovery group.
Yep.
And you said that you wanted to make sure that you fully process the end of your marriage.
Yeah. Yep.
Why was that so important?
Oh, because I did it wrong. I did it wrong the last time. So remember that guy who I was like dating, still lived in Atlanta. I was going to grab that master's degree and then move back, right? When that relationship ended, I did not process the end of that relationship, right? We had been together for 5-6 years, right? I 7 years, I stopped counting. And I was and this is the thing about being truly, truly happy versus social media happy. I was at that time so focused. I was more focused on proving that I was okay, right? Because that's what I thought at the time, right? That's what I thought the thing to do was. That is what I did, right? Right, wrong, indifferent. That is what I did. And that is not how I should have done that. And so I did not fully process the ending of that relationship. I did not go through the grieving process, the end of that relationship, and kind of properly handle that from an emotion from an emotional perspective. And I was determined that I would not make that same mistake again. I can make new mistakes. I can't make the same ones over and over again though. So experience, they say experience is the best teacher. So I learned from that experience and was very determined to do everything that I could to make sure that I fully processed the end of my marriage.
I think it is profound, and what's the word? I think you are a professional psychologist, right? Like you, no, but I mean that because there are a lot of women who beat themselves up, because I went through that. I beat
Yeah.
myself up for not knowing better.
Yeah.
And you went to school for this. If there's
Yeah.
anybody who should have been able
Right.
to prevent some of this or see some of
Yeah.
it, and you couldn't. So
Right.
for regular, ordinary folks who don't even have a background in this, we
Right.
need to ease up on ourselves and
Give
cut
yourself
ourselves a little
grace.
slack.
Give yourself grace. That is probably, one of the phrases that I repeat most to my friends and those, who are kind of in my circle or close to me, or even people and I guess they're not necessarily random, but these kind of, side conversations that I'm having in Instagram DMs with other women is be kind to yourself and give yourself some grace. Like, we are all just trying to get through this thing called life, and we're trying different things and we're testing different things. And it's like, just give yourself some grace. Give yourself some grace.
How is your life post-divorce different from your previous life?
Let's see. There are some obvious things, right? Like, I live in a new city. There are, and I don't know, particularly what the pandemic and being in quarantine highlighted for me is that I am an extrovert. Okay. I am literally, on scales of sociability and extroversion, I tap out. Like, they're like, on the Hogan assessment, I literally scored 100. Like, I max out in sociability. I was so good in quarantine by myself. So I say all of that to say that, like, I am very, like, I got the knowledge, kind of awareness, or maybe confirmation that, like, I am okay, like, just being by myself, right? Like, so that's kind of the biggest thing, right? Is kind of that, well, one of the biggest things is the reflection. Another big thing is that, right, because I was not happy in my marriage, and this is maybe a post reflection, because I think at the time I was telling myself, well, like, I have these work events and I have to go to this and I have to go to this and I have to, like, be here and do this, right? Slowing down. And I truly have gotten really good at again, going back to the central theme of doing the things that I want to do and doing the things that make me happy. Like, I recently, I kind of told someone, like, yes, I'll do that. And then as it was coming together, realized I don't want to do that. Right. And the old me probably would have felt bad and still gone through with it. And, like, cause I have plenty of examples of that. The current me is like, nah, I don't want to do it. I know is a complete sentence, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend my energy there. I don't want to spend my time there. Like, and I don't owe anyone an explanation, right? Or maybe, I don't owe anyone an explanation. But when I do desire or want to give an explanation, it is okay that explanation is, I don't want to do that thing.
Amen,
and that's
sister.
That's it.
Amen. Oh my goodness. It says a lot about the space that you're in, that as an extrovert, you didn't lose your stuff during quarantine.
I was so good. Let me tell y'all, I was looking at folks who was quarantined with other people, and I was like, ooh, I feel bad for y'all. I feel bad for some of y'all. Some people were in their groove. They grew stronger together. They grew more in love. They are like, listen, if we can get through this, we can get through anything. But for those of us who were not in the happy, healthy, and whole relationships that we, desire, I was like, let me tell y'all how good I am over here by myself.
I even said something similar to my best friend, because during the bulk of the lockdown, I was in China, so I'm watching the shenanigans going on in the U.S. from a distance, and we were talking about like how the extroverts just could not handle quarantine and they were going to get us all killed. And I even said to her, I was like, you know what I'm thankful for? That I'm divorced. Because if I had still been married to him no, ma'am.
If we weren't already going to be divorced, we were certainly going to be divorced by the end of
somebody was going to kill somebody.
Let me tell you, indeed. Indeed. But yeah, I mean, that was a big, kind of major unlock for me. I got up when I wanted to. I slept in when I ate what I wanted to. I watched what I wanted to. And if I didn't want to watch anything, that was fine too. So yeah.
No, like I said, that speaks volumes about the place that you're in. Now, a lot of the people who listen to this podcast want to spend some time living abroad.
Yes.
And you lived in Dubai pretty much for the bulk of the pandemic.
I did. And I was thankful.
How did that come to be?
The full honest truth is that I don't know that I would have had this opportunity actually had I not expressed a fear and I don't know if concern is the right word, but definitely a fear that I had about going what we call out to the field, right? So Frito, Pepsi, you have headquarters roles and then you have roles that are in the field. I knew I can do this headquarters HR business partner role, right? I can support HR and I can support finance. Going out to the field for me was a scary thing because of the volume, like the pace and the volume of information. There is so much kind of synthesizing of information and there's just a lot going on. Like if I told y'all about like my day or my week, like there's just a high volume of things that going on. And I quite honestly did not believe that I could keep up with the pace, right, of roles in the field. So I was having a conversation, and I've talked a bit about like my personal board of directors, right? Having lunch with two of those folks. One of them is like my sponsor, at work. And so I shared that fear, and of course they, in a kind and gentle way, but also lit into me. Like, what the hell do you mean? Like, if you don't want to go out to the field, don't go out to the field. But the reason why you don't go out to the field can't be because you don't think that you're going to be good at it. Like, stop that foolishness. So then I had a follow-up conversation with my sponsor and to kind of talk more about that. She had just come back from a field role. And honestly, we were talking about me going out to the field, and she said, well, hey, are you mobile? And I said, yeah. And she says, well, are you mobile? And I'm like, yeah. And she says, well, are you Dubai mobile? And I said, now listen, I don't care what the job is. I will sweep the floors. I will file the papers. I will do the laundry. I don't really care what the role is. Yes, please sign me up. So she happened to be the Senior Director of Learning and Development for Frito. We have 5 sectors. Long story short, the AMISA sector, their kind of learning manager was going out on maternity leave. So then the learning director sent a note to all of the sector learning and development leads to say, hey, we have this short-term assignment opportunity. Do you know anyone that's interested? So honestly, I mean, yes, maybe she would have thought of me or thought to send the email along. But what happened is that email had just kind of recently landed in her inbox. And I happened to be having a conversation with her, right? Career conversation. And that's honestly, that's how it happened. That's how the opportunity came to me.
Well, I think that underscores the importance of being vocal about what you want, what your desires are, and even things that you think like that you might not be good at.
Right. Yeah. Going back to that again, Brene Brown, that vulnerability piece, right? Like vulnerability, opening up, sharing, with the appropriate people, of course, right? But opening up.
And so I want to just talk a little bit about kind of what your life was like there, because that's a very different move than some of my
Yeah.
other guests have made. Like
Yeah.
I've spoken to people who have, been what's the word, a diplomat,
Mm-hmm.
and then I've spoken to people who were like, oh, I went to teach English.
Right.
So your company took care of your visa, yes,
Yes. Yep.
and they took care of housing.
Right. Yep.
Did you have to pay for anything?
I mean, yes and no, right? Like they took care of my housing, my visa, and I got a daily per diem as well, right? So in theory, right, there was nothing, if I budgeted and stayed in that, daily allotment, right? There was this could have been a very much all company sponsored or paid trip. We know that Dubai is expensive. We also know that I like to do things, right? So so skydiving was a little bit outside of the daily per diem, right? So things like that. But yeah.
And talk about your accommodations.
Yeah, so I we work with vendors, right? So we have a vendor that basically organized kind of housing, right? So they send over like, hey, here's your allotment, right? Like here is here's your basically housing stipend, let's call it that. And here is here are some options, right, that are kind of within that range. So I selected some places. I mean, I narrowed it down to a couple places. It really came down to, am I going to live closer to work, or am I going to live near the marina by the water, which Corona, right? That became a moot point. And I
Yeah.
ended up moving kind of halfway through. But for me, think aesthetics are important. And there was one of the places where I was like, that bathroom just looks so janky. And I don't want to, I'm gonna go with this other place. So I lived, the first place where I lived was 20 minutes door to door, for me, like walking out of my apartment to walking through the door at work. One train stop, right? Like in theory, I could have walked there.
But it's a million
But
degrees outside.
but it's a million degree, I got to a point where it was a million degrees outside. I mean, but actually here's the thing. I only went to the office. So I landed in Dubai on February 29th. I got to, and then I had March 1st kind of off to, kind of get my bearings, get settled. I was in the office from March 2nd to the 17th. And then I never went back into that office again. So that was at a point where it wasn't like kind of blistering hot where I could have walked if I wanted to. I mean, it was still a little warm some days, right? But yeah.
But your apartment was like, this is like a luxury high rise.
Was it a luxury high rise?
I don't know. That's what it looked like to me, and definitely compared to where I was living.
It was definitely, so it's what they call an apart hotel. So my apartment, and in both of them, this is true for both of the places that I live. It was like an apartment right at the top of a hotel, right? So, so it was kind of full bedroom. Like it's essentially a 1-bedroom apartment.
A really
First floor,
nice 1-bedroom apartment.
That's
the part you're not saying.
It was really nice, very spacious, like probably like not, let's just call it 1,000 square feet. I think the first place was like 970. No, it was like 970 square feet. But yeah, it was a nice apartment.
Yeah. No, like there are much worse places to spend a pandemic.
Absolutely. And that was my thing, is that, okay, so a little bit, I chose particularly the first place, because in Dubai, you can only have alcohol in bars and restaurants that are associated with hotels, right? So the place where I lived had a bar at the bottom, right? It had restaurants, of course, but it also had a bar at the bottom. So that too was one of the deciding factors, which came in very handy during the pandemic when you couldn't go nowhere. And so I could just order a bottle of wine, right, when I needed to, from like room service, right? That came in
Yeah, very handy.
very handy during, coronavirus.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Do you think that are you open to living abroad again sometime in the future? Or that was just a
Absolutely.
fun thing you did?
I would, I'm putting this out to whoever is out there listening, God and the universe and the PepsiCo executives who might happen across this podcast, that I would love to go live. So I'm planning to go. So I went to South Africa, right, 2013, planning to go back in July, this upcoming July, for my 35th birthday. We have a business, Pioneer Foods. I would love to go live in South Africa and to work on our Pioneer Foods business. So yeah, but I'm open. I say that, particularly with PepsiCo, and I think this would be true of, any company that I worked for, right? Especially at this point, I trust the company to send me somewhere. My friend Katie and I had this conversation, is that I will trust the company to send me somewhere that's safe and like to make sure that I'm safe. And then because I have that trust, then I'll go live anywhere. I'll go live anywhere in the world.
You wrote a post reflecting, it was about your upcoming birthday. I think this is your most recent birthday that you just had.
Yes.
And you said that you were proud of yourself for the woman that you fought hard to become, pleased with your level of confidence, walking unapologetically in your badass blackness. I love that part, by the way. Reflecting on all the blessings that you've had that year and loving the happy, healthy, whole life that you are living.
Yes.
What advice do you have for someone who is not there yet, that still might be wrestling with the question of their happiness and not sure what to do or how to proceed? What advice do you have?
Yeah, there are a couple of pieces. Journaling is one that immediately comes to mind. One, because like we have these thoughts in our head, right? And then they can really cause us to spin out. That, at least that's been my personal experience. Journaling is such a great process. And you're also like holding that tension in your body. For me, journaling, there are times where I have to journal, even if it's 2 sentences, 3 sentences, I have to journal because I've got to either get that tension out of my body, or I'm starting to spin and have some anxiety inducing thoughts, right? And I've got to get that out in some way. So I would definitely encourage people to journal. A specific journal prompt that I would ask, and this is, if this ain't manifestation, I don't know what is. My apartment right now is, if I go back and I look at my journal, this apartment has everything. One of the prompts that my therapist gave me was, what do I want my long-term living space, right? Kind of after the divorce, and after things kind of settle, what do I want my next long-term living space to look like? This apartment, down to the color of the countertops, is what I wrote in that journal, right? So the specific prompt that I would encourage people to reflect on and go back and add to it. Like I left that page, I wrote down some things, but I left the rest of that page blank. And over time, I would kind of go back and add, oh, hey, this is important to me. Oh, hey, I want this, right? So specifically, as it relates to happiness, write down what happiness looks like for you. What does that mean? And get, kind of specific, get specific about what does happiness look like for you. I'm always going to shout out to therapy. Again, realizing that is a statement of privilege and not everyone has access to therapy. But for those that do, highly recommend. I have the greatest tribe in the world. I know some of the most wonderful people that God has put on this earth. They are great. They have been my refuge, my Calvary, my system of support. There were some things that I needed to process through with my therapist, right? And I needed to know that this wasn't just my friends gassing me, right? I needed to know that, like, you know, from a truly outside person who's not biased, who, you know, whatever, that was that's what I needed. So journaling with the specific prompt of what does happiness look like, therapy, and another, I'm gonna go back to shouting out Glennon Doyle. Another big takeaway from one of her books is to be still and to do the next right thing. And that is so powerful for me, and has been. And I just recently shared that with someone who's really kind of in a low place and is struggling with some things in life, is be still and do the next right thing. And the next right thing, what I would say particularly for women, is to listen to yourself.
Amen.
Trust yourself, and whatever your gut, your intuition, whatever you want to call it, is telling you, listen to it. You don't have to rationalize it. There doesn't have to be a reason for it. If you want to get up and run 8 miles and you don't know where that came from, get up. And if there's something telling you to get up and run 8 miles, do that. If there is something telling you to, you know, sit, grab a cookbook and brew a cup of coffee and sit on the patio and flip through the cookbook, when maybe you, quote unquote, should be doing laundry, or you should be washing your hair, or what, all the things on the to-do list. Those to-do list items are going to be there. Trust yourself and listen to yourself, and listen to what your gut, your intuition, and particularly what your body is telling you to do. We've got, particularly as women, we've got to get better at trusting ourselves.
I don't have anything to add to that. I really don't. Because these are, especially the intuition piece, like that's the thing right there. So
we get talked out of it as women. We've been
conditioned not to listen to that voice, because, and it was so profound to me when I figured out that that's what I was doing, that part of my unhappiness was I kept talking myself out of the things that would make me happy. And where did that come from? It's because I had been conditioned by society that, no, that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to spend your time this way. You're supposed to do this thing. And it's like, no, your intuition knows what's up. And so when that voice tells you, like, like when you said that somebody had asked you to do something and you had said yes first, and then you were like, I really don't want to do that. And you listened to that oh my gosh, I was so guilty of that, of dismissing that voice.
Because we're taught that, like, if you can't explain it, no, my explanation is I don't feel like it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to. We are talked out of that as women, as like, oh, that's, you know, you being emotional, or that, you know, just all of the negative things that you hear about listening to your feelings and your emotions and your intuition as women, right? Trust yourself. That's it. That's the bottom line.
Trust yourself.
Trust yourself.
Now, if somebody wants to continue to follow your journey, where should they find you? On Instagram?
Instagram, and these stories that I do not know why y'all listen to me. Shenanigans in my Instagram stories, at Oak Cliff PhD. You don't really say it like that, but the words are oak, like oak tree, cliff, like you're rappelling off the side of a cliff, which I highly recommend if you haven't done that. And then PhD as in the degree. That's where people can find me on Instagram. You know, just engaging in whatever today's shenanigan is in my stories, or doing some type of unboxing on Instagram Live that, you know, has some colorful moments from time to time.
Well, let me thank you again for coming on here and sharing your truth and sharing your story.
Absolutely. I am quite honored. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me. I love what you are doing and the world that you are cultivating and the space that you are making and holding. So I really love it.